Modi landing in Brunei, the first Indian Prime Minister to visit Brunei, and we have these pictures right now. We'll be going across to that. The Prime Minister arriving in Brunei. Left for Brunei early this morning. It's a two-day visit, two-nation visit rather, to Brunei and Singapore. Both countries undoubtedly important partners in India's Act East policy, and the Indo-Pacific vision is what the Prime Minister had earlier said today before leaving for Brunei in a statement. He's embarked on a visit to Singapore and Brunei, the first ever bilateral visit by an Indian Prime Minister. He is going to be having various engagements in both these nations. The Prime Minister spoke about the fact that the focus is going to be on deepening India's ties. The Prime Minister also spoke about the fact that he is looking forward to his meetings with the Sultan of Brunei, of the royal family, members of the royal family, to advance the historical relationship, he said, between the two countries to new heights. He's traveling to Singapore tomorrow, which is Wednesday, where he is going to be meeting the president. He's also meeting leaders of members and leaders of Singapore's vibrant business community. He spoke about it earlier. Both countries are important partners in our Act East policy and the Indo-Pacific vision, is what the Prime Minister said. Prime Minister in Brunei, marking the first ever visit by an Indian Prime Minister to the South Asian nation. The two-day visit aims to strengthen India's ties with Brunei, commemorating 40 years of diplomatic ties between the two countries. Prime Minister Modi in Brunei at the invitation of Sultan Hassan Al Bolkiah, the second longest reigning monarch in the world. First ever bilateral visit by an Indian Prime Minister. This trip today and tomorrow comes at the invitation of Sultan Haji Hassan Al Bolkiah. The first bilateral visit to Brunei by an Indian Prime Minister, marking 40 years of the establishment of diplomatic ties. These are pictures of the Prime Minister who's just landed in Brunei as we speak. Going straight across to Shashank Mattu, getting in more details on that big story. Shashank, take us through the details of what is expected as far as this bilateral is concerned, and also the deliverables here.
Absolutely. So, Brunei is a country that has come up in importance over the last couple of decades, largely on the back of its oil and hydrocarbon reserves. India has made very clear that one of the things it wants to look at is long-term natural gas contracts with Brunei. This is a country that has really become very powerful in this field, and India is very clear that over the last couple of years it's wanted to diversify its sources of energy, of hydrocarbons, of natural gas, and one of the things that India wants to look at with Brunei is this issue of long-term natural gas contracts. Also, there is going to be conversations on defense. India wants a joint working group on defense because, of course, as you pointed out, there's the Indo-Pacific angle, there's the Southeast Asia angle. India has worked very closely with ASEAN over the last couple of years in trying to improve its defense footprint in the Indo-Pacific. That's something that's going to come up in the bilateral talks. And, of course, space is something that India has worked with Brunei on. Brunei hosts a telemetry station that India put up there about 2 decades ago, and all of India's satellite launches towards the east rely on this telemetry station. So really on defense, on energy and that trade, as well as on space cooperation, there is going to be a lot of work, a lot of deliverables in this visit by Prime Minister Modi to Brunei.
All right, and also, Shashank, give us a sense of the visit to Singapore, which is tomorrow. What is expected tomorrow?
No, absolutely. So with Singapore, the Prime Minister is, of course, expected to meet with the top leadership of Singapore, which was also, top leaders. Three of their most senior ministers were in New Delhi to meet with their Indian counterparts. What's expected here is a big push on semiconductors. That's something that India has really focused on across the board with countries like America, with countries like Japan. Now, Singapore, of course, it wants top technology firms to come here and cooperate with Singapore on technology. Of course, Singapore also one of the biggest sources of foreign direct investment into India. So one of the things that India wants to work on, as with any visit by Prime Minister Narendra Modi abroad, investment as well as financial flows into India is always going to be a top priority for Prime Minister Modi. You're going to see that as well. Fintech, digital technologies, links between UPI and Singapore's Pay Now. That is something that has happened. India also wants Singapore to come up and set skilling centers in India to train its large demographic dividend, its large capacity, millions of young workers in India. It wants Singapore to come in and train those people. So again, a number of deliverables that you're expecting with Prime Minister Modi going to meet with this top leadership of Singapore tomorrow. And that is one of the big things we're expected to see during this tour of Southeast Asia by the Prime Minister.
Yes. Talk to us about the visuals. In fact, we see on our screens right now the Prime Minister being welcomed at the airport right now. Shashank.
Yes, absolutely. This is a big event for Brunei as well, hosting a leader of the world's largest democracy. As you very rightly pointed out, this is the first visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Brunei. Generally, one of the big focuses of Prime Minister Narendra Modi over his time as India's Premier has been to open up parts of the world that have not been visited by Indian leaders in the past, that have been less areas of focus. We saw him go to Poland. We saw him go to Ukraine, places that had not been visited by an Indian Prime Minister in decades. Earlier, you also had a visit to Greece. So really, one of the things that you see with Brunei welcoming an Indian leader is, at one level, this is an Indian leader going to Brunei, opening up a new front of India's cooperation with Southeast Asian countries. And also at the same time, you have for Brunei a opportunity to court India to get, as I was mentioning, natural gas contracts, and as well, and to also see how they can cooperate with India, which, as you might
is a ceremonial welcome by the Prime Minister. Let's take a listen. Shashank. According to Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the visit, Shashank, of the first Indian Prime Minister in 40 years to the country. Significant this visit comes as it does, given that the first Indian Prime Minister is visiting Brunei in 40 years, in 4 decades, Shashank.
No, absolutely. And as I was mentioning, this is something that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has really made a front and center part of India's foreign policy, engaging with important countries in the Indo-Pacific. You've seen the Sultan of Brunei visited India in 2018 when all the heads of state of ASEAN nations were brought to India for Republic Day. That was the kind of outreach that you don't see very often to a part of the world that has, in some senses, been less of a strategic priority. But, of course, over the last couple of years, you've seen ASEAN come back very, very strongly into India's strategic landscape. And that's what you're seeing with this visit after several decades of an Indian Prime Minister going to Brunei, trying to see what can be done on defense cooperation, in terms of expanding India's footprint into this part of the world, in terms of securing India's energy supplies. So really, as I was mentioning, an attempt to open up new fronts for India's foreign policy and attract new partners to India's growing story.
Well, absolutely. These are pictures of the Prime Minister's ceremonial welcome, the first bilateral visit, like Shashank is telling us, by an Indian Prime Minister to Brunei. It's marking the 40 years, really, of the establishment of diplomatic ties. Once again, Shashank, for our viewers who would have just joined us, a sense of what to expect. What are the deliverables here in this meeting?
Absolutely. So as I was mentioning before, there are really three baskets of things that you're expected to see during this visit. The one and the most important is likely going to be what India wants on the energy and hydrocarbons front. India has made no secret of the fact that it wants long-term natural gas contracts from Brunei. Brunei is a country that over the last couple of decades has banked its prosperity on the fact that it has discovered oil and natural gas, one of the richest countries in the world, largely off the back of these oil and natural gas exports. India, of course, is diversifying its sources of energy, and Brunei is one of the countries it wants to work with. So that's something you're going to see. Defense, India is very clear that it wants joint cooperation on defense. This is a very strategically sensitive part of the world, Southeast Asia, the Indo-Pacific. So part of India's policy of working more closely with Indo-Pacific countries is going to be reaching out to countries like Brunei. And so they want a joint working group of defense to really streamline that cooperation. That's what you're going to see. And finally, space is also going to be something. India has been building space partnerships with countries all around the world. Something, again, that you're going to see is what Brunei hosts a telemetry station for India, has done for the last couple of decades. And what you're going to see is really an intensification on that cooperation on space. So three things, as I was mentioning. You're going to see energy, you're going to see defense, you're going to see space, and of course there's going to be some conversation on the diaspora as well. Remember, 14,000 Indians live in Brunei and are an important part of the society there. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is expected to meet with them as well. So you're going to see something on that people-to-people connect as well. So really those four baskets of things that you can expect to see Prime Minister Narendra Modi bring up during this visit to Brunei.
All right. So you did speak about the fact that there will be an interaction with the diaspora. This is expected tomorrow as well in Singapore.
One of the mainstays of the Prime Minister's outreach to any country that he goes to is to connect with the Indian diaspora there. He's been very clear that he sees people as a living bridge of India's foreign policy to other countries. So with Singapore, you're expected to see that. But of course, the meetings with the top Singaporean leadership, including the Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, is expected to be one of the very, very key segments of what India wants to achieve there, what Prime Minister Narendra Modi wants to achieve there, especially given the fact that semiconductors, which has been such a priority for this government and for India over the last couple of years, is going to be a centerpiece of the conversation. So that's where the focus is going to be, on whether India can get what it wants from Singapore on the crucial issue of semiconductors.
All right. So these are details that Shashank is getting for us about the Prime Minister's visit, two-nation visit within a span of 2 days to Brunei and Singapore. And like Shashank is telling us, Shashank, the focus is going to be on deepening India's ties. Leaders of the Indian business community also to meet up with the Prime Minister in Singapore tomorrow.
Absolutely, and that's where the focus is going to be. Remember, always for India, the focus is advancing substantive cooperation between the governments of the two countries as well as the societies of the two countries. This is not just a top-down relationship in both sides, especially when it comes to Singapore, given the large Indian diaspora there, particularly in professional services, particularly historically as well, given the large population of Tamils that resides in Singapore. So absolutely, you're going to see really top-level government meetings tomorrow with Singapore, focusing on this question of technology, focusing on this question of more investment, focusing on the question of closer technologies on closer financial technology cooperation, fintech, UPI, Pay Now. These are big questions that India has wanted to work on, skilling and so on. So that's one part of the equation. But again, the second part of the equation being that India will, of course, look to connect with the diaspora as well, as it sees it as an increasingly important part of its foreign policy anywhere in the world, given how important the Indian diaspora is, especially in the politics of Singapore.
All right, I'm going to thank you, Shashank Mattu, getting us up to speed with those details and putting the Prime Minister's two-nation visit over a span of 2 days into perspective.